All right, so last time we left off with quite a moment, I'd say.
You did.
Dante fainting. Not once, but twice
Twice, yeah.
on his journey so far. Um, and, it's not just any faint. It's right after hearing that really powerful story of Paolo and Francesca.
Exactly, exactly. It really does make you think about how these powerful stories can affect us even, hundreds of years later.
For sure. I mean, we talked about last time that whole forbidden love thing, sparked by reading, no less, about Lancelot and Guinevere.
Yeah, it's that spark, that initial moment that can lead to, well, quite a downward spiral, as we see in the Inferno.
Absolutely a spiral,
Yeah.
spiraling down. But today, we're going to see where Dante goes next. We're moving on to Canto 6 of the Inferno, and we've got Dante's text itself, of course. But we're also going to be bringing in some really interesting analyses and even a little linguistic deep dive for you.
Oh, I love a good linguistic deep dive.
Right? Always fun. And the big takeaway, I think, for us today and for everybody listening is how Dante's very personal, journey through hell can actually teach us something about our own lives, our own journeys, so to speak.
I think that's a really valuable point to keep in mind. It's easy to see this as just a story about, some guy in hell, but it's so much more than that. It's a reflection on the human experience, on the choices we make, and the consequences that follow.
Totally. So to set the stage a little bit, Dante and Virgil, our trusty guide, they've left that fiery second circle of lust.
Yeah, it was getting a little hot in there.
It was. And now they find themselves in the third circle. And this one's dedicated to the sin of gluttony.
It's a pretty big shift in atmosphere, right? From the kind of passionate heat of lust to something much heavier and, well, stickier.
Definitely stickier.
Yeah.
We should probably paint a picture for everyone here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So picture this. It's constantly raining. Like just a relentless downpour.
Not exactly a light sprinkle.
No. Freezing rain and the ground. Well, it's just mud. Thick, disgusting mud. And that's where the souls of the gluttonous are. Lying in this mud. Completely miserable.
Sounds pretty rough.
Oh, and it gets worse. They're not alone in this muddy mess. They're being constantly tormented by, wait for it, Cerberus.
Cerberus.
Yeah, that famous three-headed hound of the underworld?
Ah, right, of course. 3 heads, huh?
3 heads, snarling, snapping, adding to the general misery of the place. It's not exactly a welcoming committee.
So what happens? Do they just turn and run? I mean, I'd be pretty tempted.
Well, Virgil's got this. He's a clever one, He pacifies Cerberus by throwing clods of earth into each of his 3 gaping mouths.
Each mouth. So like a handful of dirt times 3.
Exactly. It's actually pretty symbolic when you think about it. Earth, often represents those earthly pleasures, those material things we crave in excess.
I see. So silencing the embodiment of overindulgence with, well, basically the source of that overindulgence.
Exactly. And once Cerberus is quieted down, Dante and Virgil can move deeper into this circle. And that's where they encounter, well, let's just say, a familiar face.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, someone Dante actually recognizes.
He does. Among all these suffering souls, he spots Ciacco, another Florentine.
And this is actually the first Florentine he comes across in hell, right?
The very first. And the sources say that in medieval Tuscan, Ciacco pretty much just meant pig.
Oh, wow. So like no beating around the bush with his name, huh?
Pretty on the nose, yeah. But even though his name basically screams glutton, you see this interesting thing in Dante's writing.
What's that?
Even though Ciacco's down there, condemned for this sin, Dante still treats him with this kind of respect and compassion.
It's more than just a list of names and sins, then.
Right. Dante's really trying to explore the human side of these souls, their stories, their struggles, even their regrets.
And Ciacco's story, well, it's not just about his personal fate. He actually gives Dante a prophecy about what's going to happen in Florence.
He does. And it's not good news. He predicts all this civil unrest, factional fighting, and ultimately the downfall of the white faction.
Which, if I remember correctly, was Dante's side, right?
It was. So imagine how this must have hit him. Hearing this down in hell from a condemned soul about the city he loves and the political group he belongs to.
Must have been pretty jarring.
Definitely. And this brings up a huge point that runs through the whole Inferno.
What's that?
That even these personal sins, like gluttony, they don't happen in a vacuum. They have ripple effects. They can impact society as a whole.
So Ciacco's not just down there for, like, eating too much.
Right. Dante's showing us how individual choices, even though seemingly private ones, they can contribute to bigger problems. Corruption, division, even violence.
It's like he's saying that what we do in our own lives, it matters. It has consequences beyond just ourselves.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when you consider some of the questions Dante asks Ciacco. Well, he wants to know about the afterlife. Specifically, he asks whether the punishments in hell will be more or less intense after the Last Judgment.
That's a pretty big question.
It is. And Ciacco's answer, he says they'll be even more severe when the souls are reunited with their bodies.
Oh, wow. So it's like the whole package deal, huh? Soul and body both suffering the consequences.
Exactly. It really underscores this idea of divine justice. Actions have consequences, and those consequences are eternal.
Which brings us back to this concept of poetic justice. It's like throughout the Inferno, Dante's showing us how the punishment fits the crime, you know?
Right. And with the gluttonous, it's almost ironic. They spent their lives indulging in excess, right? Food, drink, constantly satisfying their appetites.
And now,
Now they're in this disgusting mud, constantly rained on and always hungry and thirsty. It's a pretty brutal mirror image of their sin.
no escaping it, I guess.
Nope. And when you think about Ciacco's prophecies about Florence, you start to see a bigger connection here.
Between the individual and society, you mean?
Yeah. It's like those unchecked desires, the ones that lead to gluttony in one person, they can manifest as greed and corruption in a whole city.
So individual excess feeding into societal decay.
Right, and it creates this vicious cycle. Gluttony leads to more gluttony, greed leads to more greed, and it all just spirals further downward.
That's exactly what Ciacco's predicting for Florence.
Exactly, and even in the midst of all this suffering and doom and gloom, you see this really human moment from Ciacco.
What do you mean?
He asks Dante to remember him, to tell people about him when he returns to the world of the living.
It's like even in hell, he still wants to be remembered.
Right. And it makes you think about how important memory is, how we all want to leave some kind of mark on the world even after we're gone.
It's not just about punishment then. It's about these human desires and regrets that follow us even into the afterlife.
And Ciacco's whole explanation of divine justice, how it intensifies after the Last Judgment, it's a stark reminder that our actions have consequences.
Consequences that last way beyond our earthly lifespan.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this look at Canto 6, there are some key takeaways to keep in mind. First, that idea of poetic justice, the punishment fitting the sin. Then there's this connection between personal indulgence and societal corruption.
It's like a warning almost about how our individual choices can affect the world around us.
Right. And then there's that human longing for remembrance. Even in the darkest depths, we still want to be remembered.
And finally, that powerful concept of divine justice. It's not just about earthly punishments. It's about something much bigger and longer lasting.
And that brings us to the big question for everyone listening today.
What's that?
How do your own excesses, your indulgences, your unchecked desires affect your life and the lives of those around you?
It's something to think about, isn't it?
It is. How are our choices shaping our own personal journeys? And what kind of legacy are we leaving behind? It's a lot to consider.
For sure. Until next time, everyone, remember to indulge
Yeah,
wisely.
wisely indeed.
And maybe skip the extra slice of cake just in case.
You never know.